And here we go. Everyone, welcome to episode number 2 of the GTM Playroom. Frank, it's so good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Everyone, just wanted to give a quick intro to Frank. Frank Sondors is the co-founder and CEO of Salesforge. Him and his team have built what's essentially an AI salesperson, Agent Frank, that can run outbound pretty much on its own, from finding leads to booking meetings. You guys went from about 3 co-founders to 3 million ARR in a year, in under a year, right? If I'm right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, on barely any funding. You've shipped 6 products in less than 2 years, and you've literally written the book on AI SDRs. And before this, you were kind of running sales teams of 50 plus people at places like Google and similar web. You're calling in from Vilnius, Lithuania, because you've got a wife from Lithuania, right? And it's great to have you here, Frank. Welcome to the GTM Playroom.
Thanks for having me. Yes, it's been quite a journey, being around the block for a fair bit, and have a lot of gray hair right now. So from running this company and also being in sales for over a decade. So yeah,
It's the battle scars. You need them. If you don't have the gray hairs, you're not doing it well enough.
yeah, either bald or my CTO is getting bald and I'm getting just super gray. So
Yeah, it's one or the other. One or the other. I think in a few years I'll get there. I'll get there. Cool, Frank. Yesterday, like when we were preparing for this podcast, we talked a lot about this idea of like scaling versus systems versus scaling versus people with people. And we talk about this idea like that the hire more reps thesis is ultimately dead. Can you kind of explain a bit more about this concept and about how GTM teams don't necessarily need to hire more people to kind of scale their revenue?
Yeah, so 3-4 years ago, when I was a VP sales at a company, I mean, the only lever to attainment essentially was to essentially plow more bodies. And because anything that you would do on a tech stack front or process front wouldn't move the needle like too much. Like the main input was like, let's just hire more people. And VCs would also tell you, hey, let's just get more people in because it's just we're far more likely to grow that way. So this is why I used to be in this sort of hamster wheel. Hire a bunch of reps. We would predict that we would fire X number of reps, and so we have to always replace them nonstop. And it was really the main thing that we could, think to ourselves, how could we get more pipeline and ultimately more revenue? And so since GPT-3 came out and ChatGPT came out, a lot of things also came out since then, and suddenly you were able to do a lot more with a lot less, right? So you could start and write content. So back in the days when we launched Salesforge, the unique selling point was let's just write unique emails to every person in any language, whether that's in English, French, etc. And that was how we were leading in the market back then, and things have massively changed. So then the next wave, I think, after LLMs came, like let's use N8N for example, and then you suddenly could build a bunch of workflows. And today the biggest hype is Claude, Claude coding and co-work and etc. So I literally did a webinar on that yesterday with a GTM engineer. And I bet there's more coming in other spaces, but suddenly you can build a lot of different systems, and I keep building more sort of parts of the system. So for example, this week I launched Deanonymization on high intent pages of my website. I'm enriching leads with mobile numbers, and I'm applying an AI agent to call them within X period of time if that lead did not sign up for a trial on our site. This is just something that I implemented yesterday. And then there's other kind of areas we're looking to also additionally implement, other bits of workflows and agents, etc. And so by doing all of these things, essentially by automating the things that typically humans would do, or by simply doing things that were never possible before, suddenly you generate so much output, and you don't need all these individuals as well in the business, that you feel very, very good. And what I mean by this very, very good is you just have an easier life as a CEO, sort of managing a lot less people. B, you're profitable instead of burning cash. So we were always profitable as a business. And C, I would say ultimately can scale a lot more predictably, because with humans, the predictability was there, but the dilemma was, as you had to hire reps and as you had to fire them as well along the way in sales, it's a lot less predictable than having systems that run 24/7, because you kind of know exactly what will happen 24/7 around the clocks, right? AI agents or systems don't complain, like etc. So, like, ultimately, that's what I think about. When I think about system building, I think about something to do with RevOps, using a CRM, using an automation tool, leveraging agents, trying to essentially look at my problems that I have from a agentic lens or from a systems lens first, So I typically have this sort of little framework in my head, which is like, okay, I have a problem, and doesn't matter what the problem is these days, like in sales or not. First, I'm gonna take an off-the-shelf AI agent solution if that exists. So, for example, Agent Frank would be one of them. Then, if that does not exist, or the agents just suck in this particular area, then I gotta go and implement like a custom workflow, like an NA10 or some other tool, right? So, if that is not possible for whatever reason, then I gotta go and hire an agency. So today I have, I think, like 7 or 8 agencies doing all sorts of different things for us. And then the last resort is literally hiring a new person into the team, right? So this is how, this sort of little framework that I have in my head has allowed us to really grow super fast, but also profitably as well at the same time.
Really, really cool. And I love how you built that de-anonymization workflow. Is that kind of, have you inspired yourself from kind of RB2B to build that out, or?
I mean, you can use it to any tool. I think there's not a lot of edge there. You are building your own tool. So we just used Vector, which is RB2B's competitor. And on top of that, we're also de-anonymizing with the Clay waterfall. So Clay also has in their waterfall essentially a lot of de-anonymization providers. And that gives us plenty of coverage that we need. We literally get a gazillions of leads. And then instead of kind of hitting them up on email or LinkedIn, I mean, you could literally hit them up either using a voice AI agent, right, that you can program. And voice AI agents are beautiful today. You would not notice a difference, to be honest, between a human and an agent there. And if that doesn't work, then there's other ways to use a number. You could iMessage people, or you could literally WhatsApp them, etc. So we can waterfall essentially the execution as well, right? So because you don't just waterfall the data or the de-anonymization, but also the execution. As in, if the person didn't pick up, the phone due to the voice AI agent, okay, let's hit them up on, let's send them an iMessage, or let's send them a WhatsApp. So there's multiple ways of how you can reach out a person today. And whether you plug that in through NA10 and build a workflow, or you plug that in through Cloud Code system, there's so many amazing things that you could do today to maximize performance from the audience or the market that you're going after.
Very, very, very cool. And kind of bringing back to the systems piece, I've kind of reflected on this a lot because I started my career as an SDR. I worked for a company called Gartner, which is really, really, high performing business, and on the sales front, they did really well, really good sales process. But technologically, like, they were a $5 billion company, didn't have a CRM. I was manually copy and pasting leads from LinkedIn into a Google spreadsheet. And so I think about now, like, where we've come, it seems like light years away. So, like, where does value lie within a sales team now? And I think maybe to ask that question a bit more, imagine you're like a $1 to $3 million business and you're looking to like scale your revenue. Like, where do you actually turn to first?
Where do you turn to first? Well, I mean, it doesn't matter how big or small your company you are. You still will find that I would say about 95% of companies are not at the bleeding edge of implementing agents or systems. So there's a lot of ground to cover still today. So this is also an advice to a lot of people that are listening. Like, if you want to go and become an agency, my number one recommendation is to become an agency that implements agents in businesses, essentially. And there's a lot of money to be made here, because the problem is a lot of companies internally, they are sort of afraid of systems and agents because they know that means less headcount. That means, people will get, there will be layoffs and things happening like that, right? So a lot of people don't want to do a lot of the change. But from top level, if you look at Jack Dorsey or you look at Zuck, and you look at other companies that are essentially doing mass layoffs, the reason why they're doing them is because these people are not needed anymore doing the jobs that they're doing, or they have not, they did not become essentially AI native, but ultimately today, if you look at any org, they don't typically have sophisticated systems. They don't have agents running. And I'm a big believer that come sort of next 5-10 years, you'll see a lot more companies where you're going to come in, and then 10+% of all the tasks, workflows, whatever, that those will be done with AI agents, and you will need to get used to working with AI agents in the same environment or software. And that's how I see the world evolving. But do we see a lot of companies using still AI agents today? And a lot of sophisticated systems? No, is the answer, if I'm very honest. We very rarely meet companies like us that are very sophisticated. And that's just because people are, there's a thing called, digital transformation, but this is sort of agentic transformation, or sort of, that's how I look at it. And people have a lot of resistance to that. People are comfortable the way things are. People are comfortable hiring just, more people to achieve outcomes. But smart CEOs, for example, like Adam Robinson, for example, a lot of people may know him. He also thinks from a sort of systems first approach. He thinks about the least possible headcount. He is profitable. He is bootstrapped, etc. And this is how I think.
I think he hit like 8 million ARR yesterday. I saw a LinkedIn post, which is pretty crazy. Yeah, and he barely run it.
Yeah, and I also saw his even latest YouTube video. That's how he think about it. He said, my first business I had 30 people. Next business I had a lot less people, and the next business even fewer. And that's exactly how you should think about it as well. Because like in our business, me and my two co-founders, we scaled to 3 million ARR pretty much without headcount. I think only at 2 million ARR we started to hire just a person on chat support but we had no sales, no people in go-to-market essentially till 3 million ARR. So I was literally, doing the sales, looking after customers. Yes, there was chat support, etc. And I think that is possible more and more. And of course, there are people like Sam Altman, etc., saying that there will be one-person billion-dollar companies out there. Potentially, I'm not sure. But can you build like a $10 million single-person company? I think you can. You just need to think it's something that's scalable with a big market, right? Where you're addressing a pain that a ton of businesses have. And you just need to be quick to market ultimately, right? So yeah. But also at the same time, when I think about from a tech standpoint, you can scale up fast. I also think that that also when I look at a business and then I look at agencies can be also today a lot leaner, meaner, and more profitable, essentially tech-enabled agencies. So I am seeing ultimately more and more businesses with popping up that don't have big teams anymore, but also then the question begs, what are these people then doing? If they're all being laid off. And I do believe there will be a lot more companies, SMBs essentially popping up. So also my recommendation that if you're building any tool out there or whatever, try and build with the sort of new reality or like the future where there's just a lot of micro businesses essentially. Building in Lovable and Claude, etc., and they will still need services, whether that's accounting, whatever they will need, right? So
yeah.
So
I guess in the world of like GTM specifically, like what does, if you're like looking to like build out and scale your revenue, especially if in the world of B2B, like selling, say you got 50K ACV, a TAM of let's say 10 to 20K prospects, like where does value lie and what kinds of roles are you looking for and how do you actually grow that? Are you hiring more of a systems person to build out these workflows and then you retain selling yourself as a CEO? Like, would you hire a really, really good salesperson and then a really, really good systems person or perhaps an agency to build out those systems for you? How should you think about that if you're like a, an early stage, smaller business, which most of our listeners are? Like, how do you think about
that? So good question. So today we leverage all three means of kind of going to market. One is hiring the people, and so the people meaning the people at the front line, so account execs, etc., that still talk to customers. Then you have system builders on the human front. Then we roll out agents, and then we also have agencies. So this is what I call the three ways of acquiring the business out there. So we leverage all three, and I don't see any reason why you wouldn't if you have a sizable market, So, but yeah, today the type of employees that the typical agency or business are seeking for, what I would describe tinkerers essentially. They like to tinker with things. They are system builders. They like to play games like Factorio, for example. Actually, I do see a lot of correlation between, let's call it hardcore video gamers and system builders, actually, a lot. So people that like to play very specific games, like I said, like Factorio, etc. People that, since the childhood have been playing all these games, trying to figure out this and this and that. And they like systems. They like building stuff and so on and so forth. So this is the one type of individual sort of that I do see that do really well. But like ultimately, yes, when I give you a challenge, let's say during an interview task or any task, you will not come to me and will say, hey, we're going to hire 10 people to solve this. That's not what I'm looking for, right? I'm looking for people that can hack growth without actually hiring anybody, right? Essentially, achieving an outcome without having hired anybody is what we're looking for ultimately, right? So how would you get there if you couldn't hire anybody, right? So to get to that stage, right? So yes, you are looking for system builders, AI-native people, or somebody that comes into an interview and says, hey, Frank, I have just coded this solution, or this, for this challenge.
And what kind of, in the world of GTM or sales and marketing specifically, what kind of like background does that look like? Is it someone who's been an SDR, been an account exec, been a sales rep, and then figures out how to like build out these systems? Or is it someone with a, a really technical computer science background who kind of applies their brain? Obviously, go-to-market engineers, like, Clay blew up about 18 months ago when Clay kind of, invented the term. But should you even be thinking out of the box and hiring, like as I said, a computer science grad at a Stanford or whatever it is, like really technical roles, and using that with in a GTM lens? Or do you want more of a salesperson who has that grit, but then it can also build systems as well?
So there's three types of GTM engineer, I would say, some types of people that get into GTM, let's call it engineering. One is, yes, the SDRs, the AEs, whatever, and they get into this path of they want to become more technical, so they go down the GTM engineering path. And so, for example, the webinar I did yesterday on cloud coding, his former job was being an AE, right? So, and then he became a GTM engineer. Then the second type of individuals that I see in the market are people that have been in RevOps, essentially. So there's a lot of people that are in RevOps, but they like the RevOps is something totally different. So that they would like to switch to something else, and that's GTM engineering, essentially, for them. And then the final type of individual that where you see a lot of success and a lot of people coming from there are software engineers ultimately. So imagine you've been coding for a while and then you start to hate coding or whatever. Essentially, coding is not really what you want to do. You want to, see your work come to light every day. So like there's a lot of software engineers that are very, very social, essentially. They're very, very social and they hate the idea of just coding nonstop. What they want to do is they want to, work with customers, be social, etc. And from my experience, from a quality standpoint, competence standpoint, the software engineers have outperformed everybody because they're already being trained up during the university years, on how to code, how to think about systems, and so on and so forth, how to leverage APIs, and they understand things faster and they can implement stuff faster, and they're more competent, more knowledgeable, and they can also actually talk to software engineers. Let's call it on the other side, whoever's that they're delivering to. Because as a GTM engineer, you sometimes may need to speak to engineering. So from a competence standpoint, I see the highest value for any business, which is where they have a software engineering background and they become a GTM engineer. These are from my experience, creme de la creme in GTM engineering. And that's the type of person that ultimately I'm also looking to hire. Typically, if I'm hiring for GTM engineers, I'm looking for software engineering backgrounds, but it's not a typical engineer, right? That, engineers are being put into this sort of, they're being labeled in a particular way, what type of people these are. But that type of engineer that I'm looking for is very good with people, ultimately. Yes, they have this sort of a salesy, component to them, and you can talk to them quite easily, and you can imagine them being what's called a sales engineer, right? So at Gartner, you have sales engineers and stuff like that. Or at software companies, right? So then, you would want to have that sort of person sort of working for you. So, yeah.
Interesting. And I guess it's quite I mean, it's a bizarre mindset if you think about it, to go from, hey, we want to grow our revenue, let's hire this really kind of technical dev who's never sold anything in his life. And we're actually working with we're bringing on board a client now. They're a Series A SaaS company at the moment, doing about, I think they're doing 15 million rev, and they've got 6 SDRs, and they're each paying them $90,000 all in, and they're trying to reduce that and kind of build systems to, downsize the SDR team. But I think there still is resistance at the CRO and CEO level as we're kind of trying to work this deal. I'm working closely with the head of SDRs to try and get this deal over the line. What do you think is the mental blocker in the minds of like CEOs and CROs today, which still makes them think, oh, you need to hire people and kind of sales reps, which is basically preventing them from taking that next step and thinking, right, let's hire the software engineer who's kind of, got this ability to build systems?
Blocker in their mind. It's a tough one.
Is it maybe because we see a salesperson as coming in, closing deals, jumping on calls all day, which is great. But if you think about leverage, that's not actually like a scalable approach. So it maybe, I don't know, what is it? Like, where do you think it comes from? Does that even exist? Maybe it's not there. Yeah.
The thing is that a lot of CROs, so let's say you're talking about Series A company, but everything that has happened everything that we know today has happened in the last 2 years. And a lot of people are used to doing things the old way. And the old way, these things have been done over the last 10, 20 years. So suddenly, whatever it is that you're proposing as an agency or as a new employee, you're proposing, let's do things in this particular way. Let's build out a system. Let's, do things in that particular way. Because people have never done this in the past, there is that sort of resistance to introducing something new. And you have to be in the mindset a bit like, I used to work at Google, and Google, you would typically say, hey, we need to be running hundreds of tests every single month to actually move the needle for the company. And so you have to be in the mindset of like, how many experiments are we running every single month to move the needle for our business? And the business could be, an agency, etc. Like, are we running any experiments at all? And I'm trying to, for example, run anywhere between 3 to 10 experiments simultaneously every single month. So I'll give you an example. I hired 2 agencies literally last week, I believe it was, and we're rolling out 2 new tests because I don't have the competence internally to run these tests. But when I think about, hey, I do need to grow my business because today we generate over 500 demos for our business per month. And I want to try and get that to 1,000 demos consistently per month generating for the business. So to do that, you will need to do something, let's call it unusual, or like bringing in external perspectives, to do things differently. Because, you should definitely not think, hey, I'm the smartest person in the room or whatever in the company. I do believe that people with all the tech that's available out there, they have figured out a new way, a new channel to acquire customers. So I'll give you an example of what one agency we onboarded sort of, last week. So I can't remember how I met the guy, but he said to me, hey, Frank, listen, there's one way to acquire customers and actually do outbound without having any spam issues when it comes to doing email. I was like, oh, interesting. That's a nice hook, I was like, how do you, reach out to people via email without having any concerns about spam? And he said, I've built a system with AI agents where we're going to go after your ICP in the market, and we will fill out their forms on the site programmatically at scale. And so we're going to bump into potentially the support team, whatever this team will be there, the first line support team. But we'll reach out and say, hey, guys, are you interested potentially to grow your top line by implementing an agent in your business? So instead of sending a cold email to the CEO, some person internally, you actually would go and fill out a form. And that's something that you can do programmatically at scale. And I was like, damn, I would never do anything like this in my business. But is this scalable? Yes, there's a ton of websites. They have forms, whatever. Essentially, they have different means of reaching out. And yes, there's a frontline support team. And yes, if somebody reaches out to our support team, my support team goes to Slack and pings me about that thing. So I thought to myself, yeah, in theory, this sounds, like something that could work. And so I would typically, I wouldn't be the guy that would say no to something like this, because as long as it makes sense in theory and you can kind of think in your head, yeah, it makes sense. You can scale this up. It's a scalable thing. Let's do this. Let's see what's going to happen. Right. So, and you always have to be in the mindset of like, let's go, let's show me what you got. Let's run a little test. And if it works out, we'll scale it up 10x or 100x,
Yeah.
But you have to be in that mindset, because otherwise you just don't know what you don't know. Right. So like, that's why I'm a big believer in running tests for like, tests that typically last anywhere between sort of 2 to 3 months, but running multiple tests simultaneously, not just one. Because the thing is, like at Google, or any other company, that when you run 10 tests and they're all cool tests, large scale tests, whatever, typically only 1 or 2 out of 10 tests will win. So if you want to have more winning tests, then you need to run a ton more tests, So an agency is a test, right? So whether you are being brought into the company to see whether you can shake up things, build out systems, and do things differently, for me, there's just one test. So that means if I want to have a one winning relationship with an agency, I really have to think about, I need to kind of speak to, I need to do 10 deals with 10 agencies, on all different kind of, areas. And then I believe that only 1 or 2 will actually win, and we're going to have a long-term relationship.
Yeah. That's crazy because I guess I'm going to maybe play like devil's advocate here, because I guess you say, scale lean, we haven't hired anyone, but you say you've got, 7 to 10 agencies on the roster, which ultimately are run by people. So I guess you haven't hired anyone. So perhaps is agency, bringing on board an agency, like a risk-free way of trying out something new without the kind of hassle of bringing someone on, onboarding them, having to deal with offboarding discussions? It's just kind of a contractual arrangement where you can get the value of an employee without the kind of the risk that it entails.
Good question. So, I'll say a couple of things here. So one is, let's look at Adam Robinson, right? So Adam Robinson also says he runs on 3 employees and a bunch of agents. But guess what? Adam Robinson has a bunch of agents.
A ton of agencies, yeah. I know,
a ton of agents, right? So There's nothing against agencies, right? It's just that it sounds really cool from a marketing standpoint. Hey, we're running a gazillions of AI agents, we only have 3 employees. But everybody forgets, to ask the question, right? How many agencies do you have? And then let's go back to the framework that I talked about. As I said, when I have a problem in the business, I always think about off-the-shelf agentic solutions, implement that because it's the fastest way and the cost-effective way to kind of implement and see what's going to happen. And then if not, we want to build like a custom workflow if that makes sense. If the agent doesn't exist. But in a lot of cases, we have to resort to humans. So we always leave the human options like an agency or hiring humans as the last things we will do to solve a particular problem in the business. So the reason why you go to an agency is even though they are maybe more expensive, whatever, the same price doesn't matter, or there's a risk, by hiring an agency because feel comfortable, is the fact that an agency works with gazillions of customers. Let's say, we're a SaaS company, right? But an agency, for example, I'll give you an example. I'm working currently with a YouTube agency that also works with Adam Robinson. But the way to think about it is, okay, I have a head of YouTube right now. So my head of YouTube prints a ton of content on YouTube. So why did I hire an agency? Right? Why did I have another, why? It's like the same with, we have SDR, so we have AEs, but we're still hiring an agency, on top of that. That's because I want my channel to grow much, much faster than it has been growing last year. And I don't believe that my growth aspiration, 10xing, let's say, called the YouTube channel, I'll be able to do that purely from, having my head of YouTube. Because I believe there are different sort of bits that you can do to accelerate the growth, but you don't have the know-how, you don't have the knowledge. So you need to know how things are done holistically in this space. So who's the best person to equip to do that? Actually, it's an agency, because an agency has access, for example, to 10, 20 different YouTube channels of different creators. They can see patterns, essentially. They see which tests or which videos have been super successful versus those that weren't successful. So this is a way to de-risk for you as well, and kind of making better informed decisions, because they just have a ton of data, a ton of YouTube channels that they can see what's happening, and then they apply the best practices, say, from Adam Robinson over to my channel, and vice versa from my channel over to Adam Robinson. So I don't mind that the learnings keep, jumping from one channel to another. But that's just an example. The knowledge, the competence, to be honest, is the biggest piece with an agency. So my belief, and so apart from the knowledge, is the fact that you can inject an agency and they can start delivering, within a week or two, essentially like super, right? Because they have subject matter expertise. And when you're hiring humans, everybody knows there's an onboarding period. Maybe things will not work out. You'll need to fire the rep, and like whatever, all these problems, the human problems that you have. And hiring people today is super, super difficult. I'm also a big believer that, if you're smart.
I just wanted to ask something like that, and there seems to be like a slight contradiction in what you say there, because what you say is like the value of an agency for you is in the knowledge and the know-how.
Yeah.
But then you said, I want them to come in and basically deliver, which is a very operational task. So you're saying you value the strategic component, but then you're coming in and getting them to do the operational things. So taking the YouTube example, why couldn't you get, a 1-hour consulting call with a YouTube expert who has this strategic understanding of what works well on YouTube, who then equips your employee or your head of YouTube with the kind of the guidance to then execute on it operationally? Do you understand what I mean there? Is that clear?
So I mean, delivering, I thought, here it's a bit on the strategy, let's call it, the script, whatever it needs to be done. So I think delivery, like what is to me, delivering, like executing is on the, what should be the strategy for the channel. That's what that's, so because the execution of the actual videos, like who's on the camera, is the head of YouTube still. So you're hiring agency more for the strategy piece to try and figure out how to grow this channel, and less for but it's, I mean, they still have to tell the head of YouTube what to do, the angles and everything, and thumbnails and so on and so forth. So, and the thing is that, things change in the market very, very fast, whether these are trends or algorithms, whatever you want to name it. And again, as I said, because the agency has so many, let's say, access to so many different channels, they can see patterns very, very fast, right? And they can implement then the right strategy. Like, they can shift things literally very fast for our channel, right? And because our head of YouTube, he has only access to the channel of our data, the data of our channel, right? So, and I don't think he has the ability to see, sort of broader. Also, the problem is that he hasn't really scaled a channel to like hundreds of thousands of subscribers, whereas the agency that we're working with, they have scaled other channels to very, very huge numbers. So they have the experience, doing that.
So on that, and I'm keen to hear your perspective. Like, why are you kind of retaining your head of YouTube in the first place? Why wouldn't you just get the kind of agency to come in and do all of the work?
Well, because the person that should be on the camera should be somebody from our end, right? So let's say in the case of Adam Robinson, it's Adam Robinson that's doing all the videos, but I'm not doing those videos. But that's why we have a head of YouTube, and also a head of YouTube will do other videos. So we have a lot of different sort of, let's call it, requirements. What sort of videos we need to do, like educational videos, then the typical YouTube videos that everybody sees, how to send cold emails, whatever. Then we may want to do.
Why do you want to and I'm sorry, keen. I find this really interesting. So why do you feel the need to have that in-house, like the content creation? Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, HeyReach, they actually outsource their video creation, instantly have outsourced their video creation to someone else. Why do you feel the need to kind of keep that content creation
good question.
in-house? Yeah.
So if you think about it, so there's a brand, right? The brand is Salesforge, right? And then you think about what is the face of the brand. So who are the people that represent that brand? So my thinking is that when it comes to YouTube, there has to be a consistent face. So that's what I believe is a good thing, that there is the face of YouTube, and that is the same person. That is the head of YouTube, essentially. So that, I'm not sure whether it's good or bad, but like, I do believe that, that who is the number one face? That's me, right? So I'm on LinkedIn, a bunch of different places. I do webinars on YouTube all the time, etc. But like, the core face of YouTube is this guy, Simon, right? And I think it has to be the same person. Like, swapping around isn't really a good idea. That's my opinion. But yes, I do see on other channels like HeyReach, whatever, these other, there's so many different channels. Yes, they keep swapping out the people. There's other different people that are on the channel. But also, I'd want to sort of, replicate what everybody else is doing, right? I always say, don't copy just everybody else, right? So yeah, I don't think there's anything kind of wrong, or like, you could also bring in other people, like also, let's call it influencers or whatever, even customers to be on a YouTube channel. Like, we have that, but the consistent face is just one, and that's Simon, that's the head of YouTube.
Yeah.
And so that same face, we don't just use it on YouTube, but we also, for example, do some videos on LinkedIn, for example. So this week, for example, was April's Fools. I'm not sure whether you've seen our video, but Simon was talking there about, about the fact that Tesla has acquired us as a business. And we have installed Agent Frank, our fully autonomous agent, into Optimus, essentially Elon's, hardware. And now we can do cold walking,
Yeah.
But who did that video? It wasn't me. It was Simon, for example. So they did a really cool video about that. But there's essentially other requirements, and you want one person to own that. And to be honest, when we started YouTube channel, which was sort of 3 years ago or so, back in the days, when we started off, we couldn't afford really an agency back then. So, but we could afford Simon. And Simon initially for us was doing TikTok videos, because I was a big believer back then, 3 years ago, maybe TikTok's going to fly. We're going to find a bunch of leads, etc. That just never happened in 6 months. And I said to Simon, listen, forget about TikTok. How about you go and become head of YouTube and just do a ton of videos for us on YouTube? And he said, let's do that. I was like, all right, let's go. So yeah, but I mean, the whole YouTube thing just changes over time, right? So what we're going to do next year maybe will be very different. But I think consistency matters. This is why also, when it comes to LinkedIn, I think my face is the face. There's literally no other faces, to be honest, of the brand. So for LinkedIn, I think that's different. That I need to change. As in, again, let's say HeyReach is an example, right? Because we were talking about them here. So HeyReach has I think 5+ people that are the faces of the brand, right? There's multiple faces. I am, yes, a believer. Same with Lovable, same with other brands. Yes, I'm a believer that there should be multiple people that are doing that, and that's very powerful for the company. And yes, there should be the CEO, right? So whatever the founder, typically it's the CEO, not the CTO, whatever CPO. But there's other, let's go tier 2 influences from the company, and together with them driving the revenue. And this could be the number one revenue driver for the business. But then again, you look at somebody like.
So on that, sorry, then, so what does an ideal kind of go-to-market structure look like when you take, especially you've got obviously the content side, you've got outbound with HeyReach messages and email, and then obviously you've got ads if you choose to look at that. Those are probably the 3 core pillars of a go-to-market strategy, with there obviously being so many channels within content. Can you kind of walk us through a kind of high level what your structure looks like, and how you kind of think about those 3 pillars and a go-to-market motion?
So, fun fact, we have about 20 plus channels in operation. So we call them just channels. So for us, a channel is LinkedIn is a channel, Reddit is a channel, TikTok, we're present on there, IG, we're present on there, Google Ads, we're present on there, Search, we're
Wow.
present on there. So we do all of those channels. So the reason why there's so many, so we're big believers in the way how buyers typically buy. So when the buyer sees you in multiple different places, the probability of actually converting that buyer massively skyrockets. And there's a lot of data to support that by attribution softwares like Dream Data and other softwares that exist out there. They would typically explain to you that if the buyer will see you on G2, then LinkedIn, then Reddit, etc., the probability they're gonna go with you at least to get a demo, etc., is so much higher than with the competitor that only has 1, 2, 3 channels versus 20. Right? Because it feels like this brand is like everywhere. It feels like they're big. But what I'm really doing is I'm spending, I'm not spending all my time on one channel. I'm spending, let's say, a quarter of my time on this channel, then that channel, then that channel, right? So, and I believe being everywhere is a much better strategy than just focusing on like a few channels. And that's because I also think
Why
that
is
my
that?
competitors
Why is
cannot
that?
handle many channels as well.
Yeah. I mean, why is that? Like, because I think there is a risk of, I mean, us, we're kind of more narrow channels. We've kind of chosen our channels. But I'd love to get your thought process on how do you kind of prevent it being a bit fragmented and a bit all over the place? And how do you kind of ensure that there's a cohesive motion where the same prospect is seeing you across all of those channels, right? Because there's no way of ensuring that the same prospect sees you on kind of Bombora or Reddit or LinkedIn, or sees you on YouTube. So how do you make sure that's like really tight, cohesive, and it works together?
I don't think this is something that we were able to answer internally in full. So there's two ways how we, let's call it attribute, essentially how we know what works, what doesn't. One is we use self-attribution on the sign-up. So there's an open field in the sign-up. You can literally type in anything in there. And fun fact, in our CRM, we have an attribution category called Frank. And that's literally found the brand, because what we have found out is when people are typing in, where did you hear about us? People just saying Frank. So then that means to us that we will invest a lot of money, everything that has to do with Frank, whether that's sending Frank to an event, to doing something on LinkedIn, doing podcasts, whatever you name it, whatever that means. If people are purchasing because of Frank, let's do more of that. It's the same as Adam Robinson, right? So somebody will sign up to our B2B. Where do you hear about us? Adam Robinson, right? So, but where is he? Typically on LinkedIn, right? So, but Adam could be doing some other things like going to events, etc., right? So, it kind of justifies spending money on the things that is not typically a channel, right? This is not a channel, right? But for us, Frank is a channel, right? So we will look at spending more money, flying in, doing things, blah blah blah. So now to answer your question around if everything is like fragmented, etc., how do you orchestrate maybe like I think one of the things you should also do is if you have a lot of traffic, so we have a lot of traffic on our site, we also use a data attribution tool called DataFast, datafa.st. You can just Google it. And so essentially you want to be overlaying sort of two ways of looking at where things are, where things are working, where things are not working, right? So a first data set, where do you hear about us? So we put that in naturally into CRM, and then we categorize it, right? So and then we have a good sense whether it's search or geo or it's LinkedIn, whether it's outbound, inbound, whatever. And then we have a secondary data set, which is just the attribution data from a analytics standpoint, right? Because while the user may say, hey, it's Frank, but actually the attribution software is something totally different. And it's not about being 100% accurate. It's about having a good sense where do good leads are coming from. Like I'll give you one example. I think our attribution software the other day said that, so, we had a post on Reddit or something, or somebody posted on Reddit. And so because of that post, we generated a subscription very fast. So the attribution software says this Reddit post in particular has generated us this much money, this one Reddit post. But it's not something that we've seen in where did you hear about us, right? So you need to, when you make decisions on where to invest money and what to do, we do see a lot of channels that are contributing in terms of revenue. And we also, when we get on the other thing that, it's very important, because we do over 500 demos a month, we have a lot of intel from every person that we speak to, where we ask them, where do you hear about us? And then a lot of the times the person says, I've seen you everywhere.
Mm.
So, and we get this a lot. As in, Frank, I've seen you literally everywhere. I've seen you at an event, I've seen you Reddit, etc. So this is, to me, is very powerful. And if you can orchestrate it, and even if you cannot track it properly, if the customer, if the prospect, whatever that you're getting on the call, has a feeling that you are literally everywhere in all different channels and in all different markets, Europe, US, etc.,
Mm.
then you're probably doing something right. But is it tracked correctly? Maybe orchestrated super well?
Mm.
I wouldn't say so, but it's okay. It's working for us, right? So it's not like we're complaining.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's this sort of, let's call it, a perfect state of marketing, or you should be doing X, Y, Z. It just has to work, right? We're growing every month 10, 20%, just to give you an idea. 10, 20% every month. For our size of company and our revenue size, this is top 1% in the world. So, and can you make it better? Yes, you could probably make it better. Does it move the needle though?
Yeah.
Not sure. I'd rather launch more channels. I'm in the
Yeah.
mindset of could I make the whole orchestration better in terms of what I'm doing in the channels? Yes, you could, and that could increase by X efficiency, whatever. But I'm the type of guy that let's just launch a new channel,
Mm. Wow.
because I'm in the mindset of what I call layering. So you can think of these like channels, but if I layer, it's like onion essentially. If you layer if you have multiple layers of outreaching, from cold calling to LinkedIn outreach to emails to direct mail to, for example, last year I did over 50 podcasts as
Wow.
a guest. I appeared, not one, not five, 50, right? So also when we do things, they have to be very, very scalable. When we do events, for example, they have to be very, very scalable. So for example, this quarter, I'm in about
Yeah.
15 different events. So everything has to be at scale. It has to be a layer, and we have to feel good about that we are touching ICP. So we think about these as touch points essentially, and we're purely thinking about what we call reach. Are we generating reach with the ICPs?
Okay.
And if
So,
we don't do it, so yeah.
on that then, I guess I have a very kind of systems and kind of analytical mindset where I think, right, if I'm starting a new channel, I need to be able to quantitatively assess the improvement and what that channel is, the ROI of that channel. But you're
Mm.
coming from almost like a philosophical perspective of, well, first principles basis where, oh, does this channel have reach and scale, and therefore is it a good fit? Let me just give it a crack. And you don't even seem to be too concerned by the measurement of its effectiveness. Is that right?
Yes, because I think about, so if you speak to big CPG brands like Nestle, etc., when they buy when they spend the millions of dollars with Google Meta, they buy reach. They care about reach, and that's all I care about. Did people see my ads? And they care less about the tracking kind of part and ROI, etc. So me, I want to make sure that I'm generating an impression. So whether an email got open, LinkedIn message got open, they get a WhatsApp message from whatever that is, right? We're generating impressions, we're generating reach, we're touching people. So the more touch, and in marketing typically that you need X number of touch points before a customer decides to check you out, before they
Of
decide
course.
to book a demo, etc. And you cannot think about everything being direct response. I'll give you an example. Let's say I went to an event 2 years ago, but the person only decided to sign up today.
Mm.
So there's also a conversion lag, and and with some things like events, I don't expect directly generating 5K in MRR immediately, but I know that this touch point in my timeline, because I attended and because I was on the stage speaking to 300 people, I'm pretty sure about 5 to 10 will become customers in the next 1 to 2 years. So I don't look at it like direct response, like next week that's it, we close the deal, that's it. I'm building pipeline for 1 to 2 years kind of ahead.
Mm.
I care about the pipeline that's also going to be, that I'm trying to generate next year. So to generate the pipeline next year, I need to do also some of the things this year. So I do think the way I approach things is because I know that not everything can be tracked perfectly. But if you think of the just perspective of am I in the room, or am I advertising, or am I reaching to my ICPs? And if the answer is, even if the channel says it's not efficient today with this conversion window, what is my conviction that I will be generating conversions in the next 6, 8 to 12 months? And on a lot of channels, the conviction is very high. On other channels, it's very low.
Mm.
And not everything is scientific, if I'm very honest. But you have to have this sort of good, not gut feel, but because we have so many conversations, like over 500 demos, it's a very easy way for us to know whether things are working or not, because you have a good pulse on the people that come to a meeting as to where did it actually come from, you know? So yeah.
So ultimately, like the I guess the North Star metric that you use is number of demos per month, and I
Yeah.
guess the answers to that simple question, where did you hear about us? And that's what guides all of your thinking, it seems.
Initially, yes. So then last month we rolled out this attribution software. So the reason why we need the attribution software is because, well, for a few reasons. Because we have 6 websites, for example. So
Yeah.
there's a few attribution issues there. But because some things are dependent on like conversion tracking pixel, let's say with Google Ads, right? With Google Ads, you need to feed the machine learning models with actually pixel data, right? So in order for you to scale up. So our aspiration is to be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars every single month on Google Ads and Meta to
Really,
drive
is that
traffic,
how much you're
right?
spending? 100, really?
So
Wow.
you want to be spending a lot of money. So we don't spend 100K yet, but like we want to be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars by the end of this year on Google and Meta ads. But you will not be able to do that unless you feed Google and Meta with pixel data. So like word of mouth, doesn't matter there, right? Like proper, conversion tagging
Wow.
and attribution tagging, like all of that attribution stuff kind of needs to happen from a software standpoint for you to scale that channel up, right? So, but with other channels like, events or et cetera, et cetera, there the attribution softwares have no meaning essentially. Because everything will get attributed to either the direct or SEO channel. And I know it was not SEO, right? So this is why you need to be asking this question, where do you hear about us? So when you overlay these two data sets, the attribution software data and then the way you hear about us data, and then you can see patterns when it comes to signals, you invest more into those channels. And then everywhere where you're saying no signal, essentially, no conversions coming from, you kill that, right? But, I'm just looking at trends and patterns essentially more than being super, super precise in every single thing. Yeah.
That that
So,
that's really 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 interesting. And I was actually listening to a webinar done by Cold IQ, who obviously doing really well in this space. And the VP of growth, a guy called Owen, I can't remember his last name, of AirOps. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they went from
yes.
like 2 mil to 15 million ARR in like 11 months. And he talks a lot about this. They've got a really small market, like I think, yeah, really tiny TAM. And he talks about this idea of like surround sound,
Mm,
and where people hear about you everywhere. And I personally thought that was only really possible for like when you're going after enterprise, you've got a list of targeted accounts, really tight list, and then you just hit them with content, LinkedIn ads. You're going after these, like, you emailing them, but you kind of know that you're going after those same people. But it seems
mm.
as if you're taking that kind of tiny TAM surround sound approach and applying it to this big market play where you're kind of going everywhere and you're expecting everyone to hit you. And it's very, very interesting because I haven't heard of that perspective for like a big TAM, because obviously your TAM is massive.
So yeah, so I'm a believer that when you're going out to market, you're going out to market in two different ways. One is this approach, or I call this advertising. Other people call this, including myself, carpet bombing
Mm,
with impressions. Essentially, we're bombing them with impressions, carpet bombing. And in business terms, it's called wide net approach. You're casting a wide net on the
yeah.
market, and you're looking at channels that are very, very scalable. So you need a wide net approach, right? So your advertising conversions are low from an advertising standpoint, but you need to be casting this wide net because one of the things that you cannot really control in sales is the timing. So when's the best time to reach out? Because like a typical person in marketing knows that only maybe 2-3% of the audience that you're looking to reach out in your market is actually in market for what is it that you're selling, right? So, but you just don't know who these people are. And sure, you can use a lot of signal data, etc. But the best signals are the ones where I would say the best signal is the one that comes before the actual signal, And a lot of
Mm.
that data anyway is internal data. You don't have access to the internal data, which is why you need to advertise, right? You need to prime the audience. You need to warm them up, etc. So then when you will use some form of signal to reach out, people have heard about you, right? Because you've been doing so much advertising. So I'm a big believer of combining the what's called the wide end approach and then with the spearhead approach. So wide end, we keep on advertising. So essentially knocking of doors of every single ICP once a quarter. This is what we preach. Once a quarter, knocking on doors of every single ICP. That
And
means
when you say every single ICP, have you like mapped out your market? Is there like a list of 100,000 leads which you hit up with Meta ads, Google ads, and LinkedIn
a
ads, or
million
no?
plus.
A million. You've got a million contacts in that list. You've got a
Yeah.
CSV with a million leads, yeah?
Yes, so you want to be touching base with about 1 million once a quarter, at least one email, right? And it's not about asking them to sign up for a demo or something like that. It's purely asking them potentially to invite them to a webinar. So there has to be some sort of, we call this a touch point. There has to be a touch point with the ICP in your market, whatever the touch point is.
Yeah.
So
And could that touch point be like, if you've got 1 million prospects, why don't you just hit them with one email every single month? Why does it have
yes.
to be Google Ads and
Yeah, so this is not an
yeah.
approach. Yes, when you have what we call mega TAMs, the best strategy is just to send one email a quarter to the whole market. That's
Yeah.
it. This is the strategy for huge TAMs, just one email. And the reason why it's one email is because you don't want to burn your infrastructure. You should just send one. And that's
that's exactly what we do, actually. We've mapped out our whole TAM and we just hit them with one email. And we had a call yesterday, and prospect said, I've literally got so many emails, got 3 emails from you, and I finally realized like now is a good time. And we only send one. But
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
See, like you just need to stay on top of on top of their minds, essentially, right? To be on the radar. But in a way where it doesn't feel like it's a sequence, And then, so when you do get a signal within your TAM, then you hit them up with a proper sequence, right? You call them, etc., right? So this is why this is the most sophisticated companies that I know that advertise and then hit them hard once they see the signal or once there's some sort of assumption why the hell we're reaching out to them, right? So these two combinations is where I've seen the most sophisticated companies out there operating. And then whether you want to execute parts of the funnel with agents or humans, it's up to you. Like that is just how you want to execute it, whether you want to save some money and improve efficiencies. But like overall, this is a top level strategy of how we're looking at things. And I can tell you that the easiest part is to do this spearhead approach, the signals, the whatever, sequencing, calling up, hiring people. The harder part is to scale up the whole advertising machine. Let's call it that. To scale up the infrastructure and be able to even send 1 million emails a month. And to even, for example, at my disposal, I have 50 plus LinkedIn profiles that I can leverage programmatically and scale up. But I also know companies that have 1,000 LinkedIn profiles in operation of essentially advertising to their TAM. And on the cold calling front is the same thing, right? Do you have a few like solid reps where a rep does $1,000 a day, for example, with a parallel data, et cetera, right? So, all of those things you have to kind of be thinking of, and what else are you doing, right? So what are you doing on SEO? So for example, we're very aggressive on SEO. We're very aggressive also on the geo front, making sure we appear in ChatGPT, etc. So this is when I think about multiple touch points. We're visible on ChatGPT, visible on SEO very much. Visible on G2, visible on LinkedIn, you name it, right? So I always say if you didn't hear from me at least with one email, ever, I'm disappointed.
Yeah, and I was even, because I watched one of your webinars actually a couple of months ago, and then the reason this podcast came about is you're not even in Lisbon, but I on the Clay Club Lisbon, I said, hey, I'm doing a pod, anyone want to join? And you were on that, and you replied. I don't know if it was you or your agent, by the way.
That was me.
That was you, and I was like, wow, this guy is absolutely everywhere. So I absolutely love the energy, the hunger. It's fantastic to see. I appreciate we got a minute left, so. Yeah, really, really exciting. I think as we kind of wrap up today, Frank, I'd love to get your thoughts on, if you've got like one bit of advice to give to, someone who's like, wants to get stuck into this systems-based approach. They're thinking, right, there's so much stuff out there. Like you're, 5 out of 5 level of maturity, pushing the boundaries. Like what's one practical tip that you could give that someone could action today that's looking to build a systems-based approach?
Good question. So there's 2 ways to kind of go about it. So a lot of people need to kind of, dive deep into all things Claude. There's a bunch of courses there on Claude coding or boot camps essentially popping up right now. That's one way to kind of go, like be serious about kind of learning the skills and then actually applying those skills. Maybe build something for some companies or etc. For free, and get some testimonials and then actually become a Claude code agency, whatever. Oh, this is the second way to kind of really dive into this whole world of kind of system building, which is just join a hackathon. Literally somewhere in Europe, go fly into, I think Lovable did one in Barcelona recently. There was one in Warsaw, one in London, one in Amsterdam. I was in one in Munich. And so they do these hackathons. And I think once you've been in a hackathon where you spend like literally 12 hours in a day hacking together with a team, you got to get into this mindset of like what's possible. You'll be able to see what other teams have built. And then that inspires you. And this is what makes you think about, damn, what I've been doing in my life was like total waste of time. want to be building these systems, and you want to be surrounding yourself with these people that are that are tinkerers essentially, right? That are system builders, right, in their head. So you need to surround yourself with the right people. And once you spend for a bit of time, literally a day, hacking together, maybe a couple of days, you will be a different person. Is my take if you have not been ever doing this. But otherwise, you can just binge watch hard, essentially YouTube videos,
The
and that's
Salesforge
what I
YouTube
do all the
channel.
time.
Should we start with the Salesforge YouTube channel to binge watch?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of things. I mean, the biggest value that I try and provide just generally is on the webinars. So I always, invite an expert to talk about a topic, so that do like live streams all the time. But yeah, that's an example that I think about because I used to binge watch webinars on YouTube's like hard, like literally like every week, like 2, 3, just trying to learn how to build system in SEO or whatever, etc. And then after like few years, suddenly I can scale a company, to 3 million in a year, right? But it didn't come out of nowhere. I've been compounding that knowledge and how to build a system here, and there. So then when you hit the ground running, when it comes to having your own startup, things will work out for you, so pretty well. So
Well, cool. Well, Frank, thank you so much. It's been an absolute honor to have you on the show. As we wrap up, obviously you're absolutely everywhere, but where can people find you?
typically on LinkedIn, I would say that's the best spot.
LinkedIn. Well, fantastic. We'll reach you on LinkedIn and let me know whenever you come through Lisbon and we'll grab a beer together.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Frank. Cheers. Bye.